Hello and welcome back. So, now we are going to use what we learned about set-driven key to animate the little glowing ember bit of our ramp sliding down our little sparkler and making it get dark as it goes down. We're going to do this with the mel command that we discovered in the last video. So I'm not going to go through the process of figuring all of that out again, but we do need to know a few things. Like for instance, we already know about the set-driven keyframe command. We know that we can type in what the driver is and what our driver attribute is. We do need to kind of figure out exactly what our color entry list guys will be named. So that's easy enough. So I'm going to select my object. I'm going to open up the the script editor. Thank you. Make sure that echo all commands is on, and let's just get over onto our material, get over onto our ramp. Now, this is where I suggest you take notes. If you're doing this like I am, you're going to take notes. Move your first flag. That's color entry list 0. Your orange flag, that's color entry list 1, and your black flag, that's color entry list 2. It is a 0-based list. But I would write it down. I really would. Entry list 0 is light gray. Entry list 1, forgive me for not writing all that out again because I'm lazy, is orange. And entry list 2 is, we'll just call it black for now. I mean, you get the idea. That's charred. So now, we know what each one of those are. Perfect. We also know the name of our entire object. So we could just take this whole thing, and this could automatically become our driven object. We know that. We don't have a driver yet. Hang on just a second. Okay, so had to pause for just a moment. Sorry about that, everyone. Now, again, we know our driven. It is text underscore sparkler underscore ramp dot color entry list 2 dot position. So that obviously that's going to be the name of our driven object. We don't have a driver yet, so just put away your script editor. It will keep. Keep that in mind. We need to create our driver. This is pretty easy. We're going to go to create, make a locator. Immediately, though, please name this. In fact, we could just go to show, and we could temporarily turn locators back on. There we go. I knew it was around there somewhere. Please name it, though. We're going to call this control. Let's capitalize it. Control underscore sparkler. That'll be enough. It controls the sparkler. That's what it does. Move this up to the top. And I'm going to do something fancy that you guys haven't seen yet. So be prepared for fanciness. In the attribute editor, under control sparkler, not under the shape node. See the shape node? You don't want the shape node. You want control underscore sparkler. You have your transform attributes. I don't care about those. You'll see limit information. This is pretty cool. We're gonna utilize this and cause some limits to happen. But first things first. Select your little locator, select your sparkler body, and hit P. That will parent your little control to the sparkler. Okay? Perfect. Now, under limit information, expand translate. This does exactly what the name suggests. It just limits what this locator can do, how far it can move in any given axis. So I don't feel like there's a real serious need to harp on that too much because it's a pretty straightforward thing. Do we want this to be limited in X? I would. I don't want to accidentally move it away from my sparkler. So we'll say limit X min and max. And we want to set everything to 0. You can actually punch in 0 for the min and max, or see these little arrows? They'll just take the current value and move it over. So now if I try to move this in X, look, I can't. I'm dragging like crazy and it won't move in X. So now we're going to take translimit Z, turn that on for min and max, and just do the same thing. So now we can't move it in Z either. It's locked. Now here's where it gets cool. We'll turn on translimit Y for max. Move this, thank you. Notice how it's limited all the way at 1. That doesn't help us at all. Temporarily set that to like 10 or something. And then we can slide this all the way to the top of the sparkler, and then just send the current value over. So now, watch carefully. Because we set that as the limit, I can't move the locator any higher than the top of the sparkler. Now, we'll do the same thing. Turn on translimit Y for minimum, and set this to something like -10 just to kind of get you started. Move this to the bottom part of the sparkler that actually is thick, like so, and then just send the current value over. And now you can't move the you can't move the locator any lower than that. So everybody see how that works? We just set limits so that this little locator can only go within the range of the burnable part of the sparkler. Now really, how nice is that? That's pretty cool. So I want to do a quick ready check for everyone to get to this point. Okay, so we're ready to go. Again, all we have is a locator that is parented to our sparkler, and then we establish the limit information so it can only be moved in the y-axis. We can't move it in any other axis, and it's locked to the top and bottom of the burnable part of the sparkler. This makes it the perfect driver. Now, go back into your ramp. So however you want to get over there, get over to your material, click on your ramp. Adjust your ramp so that the very top, let me kind of do a couple of things at once. Place your locator at the very tip, then adjust your ramp so that just the top is burnt. So you kind of want the burned area to sit right there where the locator is. Well, that's getting close. Little bit for, oh, there we go. That's what I'm talking about. Now, if you wanted to be hardcore, you could set this up in such a way that it wasn't burned at all, so that you could have, later on have an animation of the thing getting lit. But we're not going to do that. We're going to go ahead and just start it off all the way up here. Now here's where it gets fun. Deselect everything. Remember your script editor? It's still holding that information, but we need the value of our driver. So select your driver. We can make this up too. It is control_sparkler, so I'm going to copy that, and that will go in the place of locator 1, and translate Y is already there. And we have our command. We're finished. Set driven keyframe dash current driver control_sparkler.translate Y will be driving text_sparkler_ramp dot color entry list, and we're going to be changing that to 0, 1, and 2 dot position. Grab the whole thing. Hit Control-C and just get the script editor out of your way for just a moment. We're going to do this in the metal line just so you can have a nice big clean viewport to work in. So paste in the command. I would take my color entry list and just set it to 0 first and press enter. Paste it again, set it to 1 and press enter. Paste it again, set it to 2, which it already is, and press enter. You've now keyframed all 3 of those values. I don't think you can set up multiple driven objects in a single mel line, but you can run multiple lines at one time in the script editor if you want to. To answer your question, Ty. Okay, now, it's very simple. We move our locator down to the bottom. We go back into our ramp, and then we just reposition our flags to wherever they need to be for this to be burnt as far down as we want it to burn. And don't be surprised if it takes a little bit of back and forth to get it positioned just where you want it to be. It's taking me a moment, for sure. That looks pretty good. Just pull black down. I think that'll do. Then we run all three of our commands again. So, press the up arrow. Actually, we should be able to just press up arrow a few times. See, there it goes all the way to 0. Press enter. Click back in here. Up arrow until you see 1. Boom. Click again. Up arrow until you see 2. Boom. You're actually done. Well, you're most of the way done. Now if you take your locator, as you move it, now, here's the trick. It works, but it's not perfect. Do you see how they separate a little bit? Anybody want to fancy a guess as to why they're doing that? This is critical thinking time, because watch really closely what happens here. It starts out, as we move down from the top, the locator gets ahead. Then the burn spot catches up and passes the locator, and then the locator parks. And Wick's already got it. It's because of our curves. If we select our ramp, and you don't really have to do this, but I would do it. If you select your ramp, and then go to Window, Animation Editors, and open up the Graph Editor, which was off camera. It's fantastic. Let's make sure we select this. So click on Select for this node here in the Attribute Editor. There's color entry list 0, 1, and 2. Select all three of them and hit F. There's your problem. Your set-driven keys are making these nice S-curves. One more time, for those who need to see that, just select your ramp. Yep, SJC is all over it. Select your ramp and click the Select button, so you're actually selecting the ramp node itself. Then go to Window, Animation Editors, and the Graph Editor. You'll see all three of these. Just select them and press F. That'll show you your curves. If you select all three of these curves and click your linear button, the problem will now be solved. So if we now take our locator, as we move it, our little charred spot goes right along with it. Done, done, and done. We are done. So I want everybody who is still following along to... I'll do a quick ready check. If you guys need to see that again, I can go through it one more time really quickly. Do you guys want me to do it again? Debata? No puta? Yes, sir? No? I'm going to take that as a no. Silence in this case means no. I don't have to do it again. But let's do a quick ready check anyway. Okay, so we've got this done, and take it easy, SJC. Now, we are going to create our particle system, which will make the actual sparkler. This particle system is fairly complicated, but it's not that bad. As a matter of fact, we could create it inside of a couple of minutes, but I just want to show you guys a few things about particles. So, what I want everybody to do who is following along, whether you're doing it on video or live, press F5 to go to the excuse me, the Dynamics menu set. Under the Particles menu, click Create Emitter, and this will make a particle emitter. Move this particle emitter pretty much to the same location as your locator. You can snap it if you want to, but that's okay. I mean, close is close enough. All right, so once you have that, if you hit play, you'll see this is just pumping some particles into your scene. So I can rewind, hit play. Now here's a great thing. If you are rendering with Mental Ray, now if I keep talking, I'll probably turn into a Cylon, so I gotta be kind of careful. But in Mental Ray renders these particles for you, which is pretty niftily. We're going to use that to our advantage because if you're rendering with Maya software, just to show you, Maya software does not render particles. Maya hardware does, and Mental Ray fortunately does, and we're going to use that to our advantage so we don't have to do a whole bunch of compositing later. Now, a particle system, like the one we've just created, is really two objects. We have the particles themselves, which this is what they look like in wireframe. This is what they look like when shaded. So I'm going to view them in wireframe for the most part because I just think they're going to show up much more easily on video. So we have the particles themselves, which I've selected here. In this case, it's called particle 3. On your end, it's probably particle 1. And we have an emitter. The emitter is this little tiny circle that sits right here in the center of your particle system. The easiest way I usually get to it is by selecting the particles, and you can just select its tab over here in the attribute editor. So here's how this works. Particles. You're going to get an emitter object, and you are going to get the particles themselves. The emitter object is responsible for firing particles into the scene. The particles themselves are really concerned with several things. What do they look like? How do they behave? Basically, everything about the particles themselves is controlled in the particle node, except how they get into the scene. That's all handled here inside the emitter. Okay, so let's go back over to Maya, and we're going to set a few things up. First off, we're going to start off with just the emitter. Let's give this a name. This will be, let's call it emit underscore stage 1. Ooh, kind of a daunting name. Let's take the particles, let's name those as well. So instead of particle 3, we're going to call this part stage 1. Then I'll capitalize part. So these are the stage 1 particles, this is the stage 1 emitter. Under your emitter, scroll down under your attributes, you're going to see rate. Crank this up. Now, I'm going to give you guys a warning. You may need to adjust your rate to keep your system from exploding. I have a pretty powerful machine. Now, the settings that we're going to use, I don't think should give anybody any grief, but they might. And if your computer starts to get miserably slow, then make sure you just tone down the number of particles being pumped in. So I'm going to set my rate to 400. This is what you will lower if your system starts to get bogged down too much. Maya's particle system is historically dependent, meaning after you change something, you need to rewind and hit play to see it update. It's also, because it's history dependent, you need to pay attention to the timeline. If this is set to real time, you may have a problem. Why do you have a problem? I'll just kind of describe it vocally. Each time the timeline moves forward one frame, like let's say it gets to frame 15. To figure out where the particles are at frame 15, it asks, okay, where were we at frame 14? And then when it goes to frame 16, it says, all right, where were we at frame 15? And it marches its way down the timeline in this fashion. The reason this is problematic is that to maintain real-time speed, Maya has a tendency to drop frames. If you have a very complicated scene, playing back at 30 or 24 frames a second may be just too much work. And so Maya will play frame 1, it'll try to play frame 2, maybe even frame 3, but your scene is so dense, perhaps, that it's got to jump to frame 4 or to frame 5. So it'll drop frames to maintain the proper frame rate when it's set to real time. This is a problem because the particles may go, okay, we're about to draw and see where everybody's supposed to be at frame 15. Where were we at frame 14? And Maya will go, I don't have frame 14. I skipped frame 14 because we're playing back at real time and I had to drop that frame. And the particle system will go, all right, fine, well, what you got? Well, the last frame we drew was frame 10. All right, well, give me that. So it'll take the information from frame 10 and use that to figure out where the particle should be at frame 15, and that can cause all kinds of problems. Bare minimum, it creates little tiny errors and your particle system is not displaying correctly. Maximum, if you have a whole lot of dependence in a very complicated particle scene, it will just crash your computer. So you got to watch out for this sort of thing. So what I do is I right-click, take my playback speed, and set it to play every frame with a maximum of real time. That means if it can go real time, it'll go real time. If it's slower than real time, it'll just do as slow as it needs to go to make sure it's playing every single frame. So here we are with 400 particles being emitted every second. Now, here's our scene. If we pull back from it a little bit, if I come back out here and turn my cake on for just a minute, just to give you an idea of scale, take a look at the grand scheme of things, how slowly those particles are flying out. It's very slow. If this was a sparkler, that sparkler would be moving in slow motion, and that's no good. So let's go back over to our attribute editor. We're going to scroll down in our emitter settings, and here's speed. This is the speed at which those particles are exiting the emitter. Currently, by default, it has a value of 1. We're going to crank that up. Now, I've done some testing, and I have some magic numbers to plug in. Don't be afraid to try others if you want to. I'm going to set this to 16. Rewind and hit play. The particles are now flying out, obviously, much more quickly. But our next problem is that these particles live forever. I mean, if I just hit play, by the end of the animation, they're just everywhere. Our sparks should not be living forever. In fact, technically, they're very, very short-lived. Now, to change the lifespan of the particles, we need to go into the particle shape node. Before I change any settings here, I want to do a quick ready check for people to get up to this point. All right, so we've got our particles which are currently living forever. To change that, go into your shape node. And as I mentioned earlier, the shape node is going to be, or the particles themselves, so this is the shape node for these particles, controls our particle behavior. And inside this, you'll see lifespan attributes and lifespan mode. Change lifespan mode from live forever to random range. This allows you to set a lifespan and a plus or minus value. So I'm going to set my lifespan to 0.1, which is a tenth of a second. Give or take 0.05. So some will live for as little as 0.05 seconds. Some will live for as long as 0.15 seconds. Rewind and hit play. So that's how far out your sparkles will traverse. Now is a pretty good time to update that if you need your sparks to go farther out. So you can take your lifespan, be very gentle with this, like we could kick it up to 1.2, rewind and hit play. And now they go out a little further. Actually, make sure you press enter. So 1.2 and press enter, rewind and hit play. Now they go out further, or farther. If we set it all the way to 1.8, rewind and hit play, you see how they're kind of moving out. Setting up particle systems is a lot of this trial and error style of testing, so get used to it now. Okay, this will be the basis for our sparks, but here's the trick. It will not be the sparks themselves. You ever played with one of those little streamers? It's like a silk streamer on the end of a big stick. And you wave the stick around and a little silk rib or whatever just follows the end of the stick. Leaves like a little trail behind. We're going to kind of do the same thing. Each one of these little points we're emitting right now is going to leave a trail behind. And that trail will be what we render out as the sparks. That's why I called this stage 1. Now because of that, we do not want these sparks to actually render. So what I'm going to do is jump all the way out to my transform node. My transform node is named part_stage 1. It doesn't have shape applied to it. Get out of limit information, and you'll see mental ray. Underneath mental ray, you'll see flags. What I want you to do is click hide. So you have to uncheck derive from Maya and check hide. And now, if you do a quick test render, you'll notice we have no more particles. That's what we want to see, is no more particles. Now, here's where it gets fun. Everything we've done at this point is not really the cool part. Here's the cool part. With your particles selected, so just draw a little marquee selection box around your particles. Go back to the Particles menu and choose Emit from Object. Then rewind and hit play and watch what happens. You get an entirely new set of particles. I'll pause real fast. See what's happening? Each particle that is being emitted is leaving a trail of little particles behind it. But we need to change some settings on these particles as well. First off, we need to name some stuff. So we have the emitter. I'm going to select emitter, currently named emitter 1. I'm going to name this emit underscore stage 2, not stage 1. And let me do a capital emit. Press enter. We'll grab the particle node, and this will be part underscore stage 2. Okay, so we have our stage 2 particles. Let's start at the emitter. This time, I'm going to take my rate, and I'm going to set this to 900. If you need to downscale that, do it. If your computer starts to get sluggish, don't rewind and hit play just yet. Next, take your speed and set your speed to 0. Now watch what happens when I rewind and hit play. We get this. The next problem we need to solve is that those sparks, those little trails, they're living forever. So go to part stage 2, or stage shape 2 because of Maya's naming convention. Take your lifespan mode, set it to random range, and this time I'm going to use a very, very low number. We're going to use 0.075 with a lifespan random of about 0.02. Rewind and hit play. We now have nice spark behavior. There are a couple of things we need to clean up. First off, these sparks are going to be very thick. You can do a test render. They won't look like sparks right now. Just take that for granted. And if you just look at them, just in terms of their size, they're pretty heavy. So we're going to thin them out. The way we do that is here under stage 2 in the shape node. Underneath render attributes, you'll see our render type is set to points. That's perfect. But we now need to click add attributes for the current render type, and we'll get attributes that weren't there previously. So basically, just click on the current render type button. Take your point size and pull it down to 1, because it was at 2. And now do another test render, and your sparks will be nice and tight. Let's go ahead and do a really quick ready check for people to get to this point. All right, we're almost done with the particles themselves. There's one last thing I want to do. Right now, these particles are flying out in perfect outward trajectory, and I kind of want them to be pulled down a little bit by gravity. Here's a trick. Trick question, well, not really a trick question, just see who's paying attention. There are 2 particle systems here, stage 1 and stage 2. Who should be affected by gravity? Reclaimer's already all over it. Just stage 1. Lots of people got that. Reclaimer was the first one, so he gets the cookie. Because really, stage 1 is handling the main motion. Stage 2 is just leaving a trail. So what I want you to do is select stage 1. You can do that in a million ways. You could grab it from the outline, or you grab it in your hierarchy if you want to. What I'll do is I will marquee select over both the particle systems, And then maybe just hold down Control and marquee select over the trails. You'll know you got it right because you just see these little tiny green tips at the end of all these pink trails. Nightwaz. Now, we're going to go under Fields. This is where you add things like gravity. So go under Fields and just drop in a gravity. Here's the kind of trick to this. Your gravity is this little tiny icon here. You can move it wherever you want. His position is completely irrelevant. But if you move it up here, it's easier to get to. Rewind and hit play. It's almost impossible to tell that anything is happening. If you look really closely, like if you aim your camera right down one of the trails, you might notice a tiny little bit of kind of drop. So, with your gravity selected, take your magnitude and crank it up to something like 25. Rewind and hit play. And that puts just a little nice arc on those sparks. It's possible that even 20 might look better, but let me see what 20 looks like. Either one. To me, the difference is negligible. That's it. We now have our sparkler behavior all taken care of. There's only one more thing we need to do. Can anybody guess what it is? What else we need to do to complete this? Take a guess. Just throw a rock at it and see what you get. Parenting. Wicks all over it. Perfect. Excellent. Select your emitter object. It may take a second. What I will do is I will grab, like just marquee select everything, and then control marquee select like so. And so all I have now is the emitter. So select the emitter, hold down Shift and select your locator, and hit P. That's it. Now, as you move the locator, the emitter comes along for the ride. I'm going to give you guys a tip. I'm not going to be animating this tonight. You guys can animate it. Really, you're animating the thing going up and down. I think you guys are now qualified enough to do that. Pretty sure. But don't animate it too quickly. You've only got 100 frames here. And really, at the end of the day, a sparkler over the course of 100 frames, which in this case is what, between 3 and 4 seconds, depending on your frame rate, it's really only going to move just a little bit. The reason I rigged the whole thing up is in case any of you want to extend your animation. You've now got a long time you could be animating this guy. So keep that in mind. But that's it now. I want to show you something else too. This is just for neatness because it's fun. It'll make you happy. Temporarily, take your frames instead of like 500. Give yourself a lot of frames to play with. And under the solvers menu, you can go to interactive playback. And now you can just drag your locator around and see what it'll look like as you move your locator. Now to me, that's just fun. But it does allow you to do little motion tests. Yeah, Wick. That will do it, for sure. All right, so I'll rewind. I'll set my frames back over to 100. And we are happy. I'm going to move my sparkler just a little bit down. There's one last thing that I kind of need to do if I want my system to look nice. Notice, when I rewind and hit play, when we begin the animation on frame 1, there are no sparks. It's only as we hit play, sparks become emitted. That's going to look to the audience like the sparkler just ignited. We want the sparkler to already be burning. So here's what you do. This is very simple. It's just easy to overlook. You might want to take a note. Hit play. Get the sparks looking like however you want them to look, basically. Then select both of your particle systems. Go to Solvers, choose Initial State, and choose Set for Selected. Once again, Solvers, and a solver is really the little system inside Maya, which is calculating what these particles should be doing at any given time. Initial State, Set for Selected. Now watch what happens when I rewind. The sparks don't even really move. This is now where they are at the beginning of the animation. So now when I play forward, they play from that point. Rewind, goes right back to that initial state. Now, for an animation this short, I don't really care if you guys animate, like if you're just going to do like this 3 to 4 second bit, I don't really care if you actually move your sparkler around. It will make it look more realistic, but I just really wanted to set it up like this to give you guys the option. We're almost done, folks. There's only a couple more things we need to do. Take your trail particle system. So that's stage 2. Under your transform node, remember we had those mental ray flags? Switch off derive from Maya. Turn off shadow. So set shadow to no. If you don't do this, then later on, when you light your scene, your sparkler will leave a little tiny fuzzy shadow somewhere on your table, and it'll look terrible. So once again, go to part stage 2, expand mental ray, expand flags, switch off derive from Maya, and take shadow and set it to no. Basically, you're saying that this particle system never casts shadows. Now, we're almost finished, and this part is so easy that I imagine all of you can pull it off up to this point. So if you're still kind of catching up, I'm not stressed. This is all very easy. Remember, stage 1 doesn't even render. We're just interested in stage 2. So with stage 2 selected, hold down your right mouse button, choose Assign Favorite Material, and we're going to make a new type of material you guys haven't seen, but it's real easy to dig out of the menu at this point. We're going to make a surface shader. A surface shader does not worry about specularity or really anything other than output color. You can see its properties over here. Let's go ahead and name this. I'm going to call it matte, watch my caps, matte underscore sparks. Set out color to a pale yellow orange. About like so. I mean, you can add a little more orange into it to taste. I mean, I'll give you guys the option of doing that later when you do test renders. Take your outglow color, set it to the same color, but a really, really dark version. So once again, it's the same color. I just grabbed my value slider and pulled it really close to black. And now watch what happens if I do a test render. That's it. You're done. You made a sparkler. Now, if you want to see my test render, which it's a little early, we're not even talking about rendering at the moment, but just in case anybody wanted to see it, let me go to File, Open Animation, because, you know, I test a lot of this stuff out before I do my class. Test render 3, this is incomplete, so you're really only paying attention to the first couple of seconds of it. And yeah, now let's bring this in. Yeah, because it changes size. I rendered it at 2 different sizes for speed. But there it is playing back. So this is generally what you just built. I just didn't get the initial state in. So you can see how that initial state helps you out. You won't actually get that igniting effect. But this is what it's going to look like. So that's it, folks. We are done here. Your homework is going to be to just create your sparkler. You can submit an MB file that should have your animation in place and should have a functioning sparkler that I could just hit play and see do its little sparkle. I should also be able to waggle the locator up and down, and everything should change along with it. So I should be able to well, provided I didn't just crash Maya. There we go. We didn't, thankfully. Let me turn off high quality renderer just to prevent any further scares. I should be able to move my locator, and I should see your ramp update, so I know that you got that hooked up. That's it. So if you followed along with this class, you're pretty much already done with your homework. Just submit that as an MB file, and everybody's happy. Are there any other questions before we call it a night? Okay. Well, nothing's coming in. Thank you all for showing up. Thank you for hanging out. For those of you who followed along, a big thanks for sticking with me. And for those of you who are just kind of taking notes, again, thank you as well. And best of luck in knocking this out. And I will catch you all either at the Thursday class or next week. Good night, all, and I'll talk to you soon.